Today we honor Charles Kingston and his family. Charles Kingston lived a very busy and varied life, both in business and church work. We present his history as written by three of his children, Charlie, Florence, and Clarence, and his own story as written by himself. The official christening certificate shows his father's name is spelled Frederic. The following comes from his autobiography.
Autobiography of Charles Kingston, born at Peterborough, Northamptonshire, England, November 9, 1856. My father, Frederic Kingston, leaving my mother, Mary Ann Hunter, and I, when I was but 6 months old, coming to the United States. My mother was forced into service, leaving me to be raised by my grandmother, Elizabeth Freeman, a very religious woman. She was a real mother to me and the wife of William Freeman. He was a schoolmaster residing at Sawtry, Huntingdonshire. He taught school at the same town where William Cowper, the great English poet, wrote most of his great sonnets, including "God moves in a mysterious way his wonders to perform." I have understood my great-grandfather and he were on most intimate terms. I attended a national school until I was 13 years old, when I went to work, later attending a private school for a short time, and then obtained a job with a great bookhouse where I had access to many volumes, with time to study, which I did naturally, it being, it seemed, part of my very nature to desire to read, which desire I have fostered and maintained ever since. After my work with the bookhouse, I obtained employment with the Great Northern Railroad Company in the electrical department. During the following 5 years, I worked up in this vocation, attending also at the same time a night school at Nottingham, England, fostered by the government, taking a course in the theory of magnetism and electricity. At the end of the 5 years mentioned, I was approached by one of the chief men of that department requesting that I go to London at the King's Cross station to take charge of all the electrical works there. This was a great opportunity, which, however, I declined, as I had already received transportation to Utah from my father, who resided at Morgan, Utah. This representative mentioned tried to persuade me to give up my contemplated emigration to Utah, saying if I would do so, I would be well cared for. However, I declined, and away I started for Utah. I arrived at Morgan September 23, 1879, crossing the ocean with a company of saints on the steamship Wyoming. I had been raised to look upon Mormonism, so-called, owing to my father marrying another wife, Emma Morris, a very fine woman and a real mother to me, as one of the vilest institutions in existence. And I actually went to studying Mormonism with the thought in mind of showing my father where he was wrong. I had some knowledge of the Bible taught me by my grandmother Hunter, so felt quite well able to judge of the matter. However, it came about that the more I read and pondered the subject, the more I became convinced that Mormonism was true. I found myself actually defending the same with apostate Mormons and outsiders working on the section of the UPRR. However, I had yet no desire to accept the doctrine and embrace it. I refused absolutely to go inside a meeting house, my prejudice still being unabated. However, there came along one day a man who I had met in Nottingham, who was a member of the church. He, after much persuasion, got me to attend a meeting of the Young Men's Mutual Association at South Morgan. I was still smoking a pipe and had it in my pocket while attending the meeting. It was about the time the mutual work started in the church, the year 1880, in September. At that meeting, as visitors were Elder John Hiram Smith and Junius F. Wells, and it was the same year that Elder Smith was ordained an apostle. Elder Smith, a man of wonderful presence and a fine speaker, spoke on the word of wisdom. I drank in every word he spoke, and my prejudices vanished away. I knew he told the truth. I no longer resisted the spirit of the work, and that night, going home from that meeting, I laid my pipe and tobacco on a shelf and said, "That is all I want of you." 3 months afterwards, on my birthday, I was baptized by Bishop Dixon of the Richville Ward, and confirmed the same day in my father's house. It was a time of rejoicing among the whole settlement, who had learned of my much reading on the subject of the gospel.
Charles tells of his first spiritual manifestation.
Some of the aged saints would gather in my father's house, and I would read to them out of the New Testament. On a particular night in the month of February, I had read from the Gospel of St. John, the 19th chapter, Jesus before Pilate. My heart went out to him in his sore distress. I retired that night with that feeling still with me. I do not know how long I had been in bed, but I suddenly found myself in a dark enclosure. It seems about 20 to 30 feet square and about 16 feet high and built of rock with a roof over it. I tried to find a way out of this place, but it was so dark I could find no escape. The thought came to me that the only relief from the darkness was to call upon the Lord for deliverance. So I made my way as near as I could tell to the center of the enclosure, and there I kneeled down and prayed most earnestly for deliverance out of that darkness. I had prayed some time when all of a sudden a light appeared above the building, and 7 men descended and stood around me, so close I could have touched either one of them. They were dressed in clothing exactly as the angel Moroni is pictured when he appeared to Joseph Smith. One of these men held a 2-edged sword in his hand, point up, his arm at the square. Neither of them spoke to me, nor me to them, and they ascended and left me still praying. I found myself directly afterwards wide awake on my bed. I was afraid to tell this matter to anyone, fearing I might not be believed. However, some months afterwards, I went to the patriarch of the Morgan stake and told him of the circumstance, asking him what that which I had seen meant. He said, "My boy, that was a testimony that the Lord had shown you through his Holy Spirit how he had brought you out of darkness into light." The sword was the sword of truth spoken of by Paul. In the year 1881, I went to Colorado to work for the Union Pacific Coal Department under Bishop Hopkins of Croydon, who was at the time superintendent of coal mines for that company in that state. I worked there 15 months among a tough set of men, mostly Catholics, who, because I would preach Mormonism to them, dubbed me the Mormon priest. During my stay there, I never took a cup of tea or coffee, and never went to bed one night without going out on the mountainside to pray. I was offered a good position by the Western Union Telegraph Company superintendent, who I had become acquainted with at Gunnison, Colorado, but declined the offer, not being willing to settle among outsiders, and also I had my eye set on a very handsome rosy-cheeked girl, who I later married in the old endowment house in Salt Lake City, President Daniel H. Wells performing the ceremony. Soon after our marriage, I acted as a teacher in the South Morgan Ward, and I was state clerk for 2 years, and was then called on a mission to England. Before this, we had born to us a son and a daughter. During my absence, the daughter died, and 8 months after I left for the mission, my wife gave birth to twin girls, my wife having much the harder part to play in our mission. Upon my return, I went to Rock Springs to work, where I was set apart as first counselor to Bishop Salisbury. We remained at Rock Springs 2 years and then went to Star Valley and bought a farm at Grover, Wyoming. The Star Valley stake being soon organized, I was ordained a high priest and set apart as a member of the High Council. I was also appointed superintendent of the stake mutuals and a member of the Stake Board of Education. I was also appointed by Judge Reiner, United States District Judge, a United States Commissioner, and most of the homestead and other land entries were made before me. I built a store at Auburn and was the first postmaster at that place. I also raised the first grain ever grown there. The ground squirrels being so bad that grain planted there was eaten like a fire had gone through it. Andrew Jensen, happening along at the time, made the fact of my being the first to grow grain there a matter of history. Leaving Auburn, selling my business there, I was importuned to go into business by my bishop at Afton, which I did, and I then also started the creamery business, bringing thousands of dollars into that district, and which finally grew into now what is one of the greatest dairying localities in the West. After living in the valley about 6 years, I was appointed Register of the United States Land Office at Evanston, Wyoming by President McKinley. I served in that capacity for 2 terms of over 8 years. When the Woodruff stake was organized, I was chosen second counselor to President John M. Baxter. I was also set apart soon afterward to preside over the stake Young Men's Mutuals. During this time, the Bighorn country attracting attention, I was requested by Elder Owen A. Woodruff to go there and look the country over with a view to our people making settlements there. I went in November, met William Cody, who wanted to sell a canal he had built to the church, inspect our location, and also the prospect for building a canal, and returned making a report to President Snow and 8 of the 12 at Salt Lake City. Elder Abraham O. Woodruff was appointed president and I secretary of the Bighorn Colony by President Snow. This investigation resulted in a colony being organized, and in the following May, 100 families moved into that country and commenced the building of a 30-mile canal out of the Shoshone River. Following August, I was requested by Elder Owen A. Woodruff to visit the colony and look into the finances of it. I found the colony out of money, practically, and in debt $3,000 with merchants at Red Lodge, Montana. The Burlington Railroad, heading in that direction, halted 30 miles away on account of financial crisis. This left the colony in distress, the winter not far away, no work, and living in tents. I conceived the thought of trying to influence the railroad to again start work on the grade. I wrote to Congressman Frank Modell, who was a director of the railroad, laying before him the absolute necessity of the colony being aided by contracts in grading, or, I said, the colony will probably break up and scatter, thus undoing what the railroad people evidently desired, that was, the peopling of that then forbidden country. I received an immediate response to my appeal. The railroad president, a Mr. Holdridge, sent in his chief engineer to look over the situation, and after inquiring as to the number of teams that could be set to work, the number of 100, he ordered immediate resumption of grading, the result being that the colony was saved. I was fortunate in being able to get all the legal work done in connection with a Carey Act scheme without a dollar of expense to the colony. I went to Cheyenne often, consulting with the state engineer and the Secretary of State, who willingly assisted me in the work. Having free transportation over the railroad in Wyoming, it came to my lot to visit the wards and branches along the Union Pacific Railroad. In fact, I had been set apart by Elder Lorenzo Snow at Colville to visit and look up the saints along the railroad, going to what afterwards became the Lyman Ward. I named it such in honor of President Lyman, who I looked upon as one of the great men of this generation. This was after the Woodruff stake was organized, I going there to audit the bishop's tithing records. What brought the naming about was that the ward was called Owen, after Elder A. O. Woodruff. There, however, being already a town in Wyoming by the name of Owen, a post office could not be installed unless a new name was given the town. I had gone to this settlement some time before it was known by any name. We met in a small log cabin which served as a day schoolhouse and meeting house. I promised the saints there at a meeting I attended that if they would be faithful, the Gentiles who had settled on some of the best lands would come to them and beg them to buy them out, which came literally to pass. I also promised that they should have a stake of Zion organized right there. This almost 30 years before the event. In 1901, November 12th, I took my wife to the Salt Lake Temple, and there we did the first temple work. I was baptized for 19 males and my wife for 23 females. We also did the endowment work and sealing. The next February, after retiring to bed one night, my attention was attracted to a group of females walking on the sidewalk across the street from our house. There were 23 of them walking slowly, all dressed in beautiful white raiment, gathered at the neck and falling to their feet with a girdle of the same material around the waist. The vision was so brilliant that I could see the weave and woof in the cloth worn by them. I have never, nor do I ever expect to see anything more heavenly. Their countenances were radiant with heavenly peace. They walked a full half block and then suddenly disappeared. I woke my wife directly after they had gone, telling her of seeing the 23 women as stated, and she answered that was the number I was baptized for. I might add they were all dressed alike, as was the arrangement of their hair. While residing in Evanston, I built 2 telephone lines, one from Evanston to Sage Station on the OSL, and another from Opal, Wyoming to Big Piney, Wyoming, a distance of 80 miles. This at the request of the settlers along these lines. Up to 1905, when I resigned my position as Register of the Land Office, we had born to us 11 children, 3 boys and 8 girls. 1 girl died as stated at 15 months. The remaining 10 grew to manhood and womanhood and were all married in the temple, they and their mates all keeping the word of wisdom. We taught our children to pray, and we have never failed to pray in our family one day during the 50 years of our married life. We have not been perfect, but we have tried to live the lives of Latter-day Saints, and we still have an abiding faith in the gospel restored to earth through the instrumentality of the prophet Joseph Smith.
Florence Kingston Nielsen adds the following. The story which I remember best of those Father has told us about his youth was the occasion when at the age of 7 he was allowed to spend 2 weeks with his mother at the home where she was employed, due to the fact that the family were spending the winter in Italy. He said he must have been very mischievous because he remembered being in the yard one day and throwing gravel over the fence, which landed on the tables and in the food of the neighbors who were having a lawn party. He also remembered one of the party spanking him for it. He recalled that when the family returned from Italy, they brought his mother a lovely cameo brooch. I, being his eldest living daughter, am now the very proud owner of the brooch, 88 years after its presentation. He and a friend then started a grocery store at Afton, Wyoming, driving a distance of 3 miles each morning and evening in a 2-wheel cart. This was about the year 1891, and the year the government sent troops into Wyoming to drive the Indians from Jackson Hole, their summer hunting grounds, onto the reservation at Fort Hall, Idaho. Since there were no telephones or newspapers, we knew nothing of this until an uncle, Gibson Condy, who was living with us at that time, returned from Grover, saying that a messenger had ridden from the lower valley with the news that the Indians were on the warpath and would probably kill everyone with whom they came in contact, and that they were passing to the lower end of the valley. The people were all together at the steakhouse at Afton to protect themselves. My uncle at once began to ready his team and wagon and gather his wife and 2 babies and enough food and bedding for the trip. He insisted that my mother do the same, but she hesitated about doing anything until Father came home. My uncle left without Mother and the children, but when he reached the store a mile away and heard the news that the Indians were as close as Willow Creek and everyone would make haste, he came back to take us with him. We all piled into his wagon and started on our way. By this time it was evening, and about halfway to Afton we met Father coming home. Father had made many friends among the Indians, and he would not believe them to be as cruel as the rumors insisted. He said to Mother, "You can go to the steakhouse if you want to, but I'm going home. I don't think the Indians would harm us, and besides, if I'm going to die, I'd rather die in my own bed." Mother and her small baby shared the cart with Father to return home, and the rest of us children walked. I remember that evening looking out to see how many homes were lighted, and we could see only one, where we knew an old lady lived, and that night proved to be uneventful as my father had thought. Father was always interested in people and made a special effort to be friendly to anyone of another nationality. When he lived in Star Valley, he befriended the Indians and later the Chinese, who did the laundry and brought vegetables to the house. When possible, he kept a spirited horse or a good dog. He loved babies, and each day when he came home from work, he would pick up the baby and walk back and forth, saying, "It gets tired of lying down all the time." It was Mother who taught us to cook, sew, and knit, but Father who gave us an appreciation of music, poetry, and our religion. When Father was 83, Mother passed away at the age of 78. After this, he spent most of his days reading, sometimes 8 hours a day.
The following comes from notes and comments by Clarence Kingston and edited by his son, M. Ray Kingston, April 22, 1974. Charles' grandmother was a deeply religious woman, and to get her grandson interested in the Bible would say, "Charles, I wish you would read me this passage in the Bible." She would say, "My boy, you see, I don't see as well now and can sleep better if you will read to me." Charles, accustomed to this every night habit, acquired an interest in the Scriptures and a desire to read other things. As he reached his early teens, he would stand outside the bookstore window and read the names of the books on display there. One day, while peering through the window, he decided to enter the shop and ask for a job. The proprietor looked at him and asked what he thought he could do to justify his being paid. Charles' answer was, "All your books need dusting and cleaning, both in the window and on the shelves. I would gladly be your clean-up boy and do all the cleaning in exchange for your permission to spend my spare time reading the books of my choice." The job was his. As soon as he reached the required age to apply for government-sponsored job training, he did so, choosing the electrician's trade. He started in the trade by digging holes and setting posts. He continued at this to the age of 22. During these years, he had been receiving letters from his father in America, urging him to come for a visit. Frederick hoped to entice him over and eventually convince his wife to join him as well. It was 1879. He booked passage to America and from the East Coast took the train west to meet and see his father for the first time. It was September when he arrived in Morgan, Utah, and stepping off the train was a part of the weekly curiosity which the train had become to the local residents of Morgan. This weekly curiosity attracted, among others, some of the young Morgan ladies who would dress up for the occasion and go down to watch the unloading of cargo and passengers, if any. This fall September day, Charles was the focus of this feminine curiosity, and elicited the disdain of one girl who offered, "He sure thinks he is smart, doesn't he?" prompted no doubt by the careful, erect, and meticulous way with which Charles observed the greeters and carried himself, a particularly Kingston characteristic. Another of those watching allowed, "He looked rather nice" to her. Mary Priscilla Lurwell Tucker was a rather meticulous person herself, both in her mental habits and in those habits related to housekeeping and moral standards. She inherited these characteristics from her mother and father, James and Betsy Tucker, themselves immigrants from England. The chance meeting on the loading platform at the train station in Morgan in 1879 between Charles Kingston and Mary Priscilla Lurwell Tucker was to culminate 3.5 years later in their marriage. Charles intended staying with his father through that winter and until the following spring. At one point, Mary Ann Hunter Kingston did make the trip to America to see for herself. She found her husband married to another woman with children by her, and her own son converted to Mormonism and committed to staying in America. She stayed only 2 or 3 weeks and returned to England. When Charles visited England only a few years later on his mission, Mary Ann Hunter had passed away. One evening, after Charles had read and absorbed all that was available to him regarding Mormon doctrine, and having experienced a winter with his newly found family and associates among the Mormon saints, the state patriarch was visiting the Kingston home. He had the Book of Mormon in his hand when the patriarch arrived, and commented to him that he just completed reading the Book of Mormon. The patriarch, when asking what Charles thought of the book, received this general answer: "If there is any truth in this world, it is in that book." And further, "I wish to be baptized." This beginning of conversion became a total commitment to gospel principles, and Charles' faith grew along with the process of total conversion. Along with his conversion came the decision to remain in America and an announced engagement to marry Priscilla. He began looking for work to provide the finances necessary to marry and support a family. He left for Colorado and obtained work as a mule driver for an ore wagon. This mule trip was 1 day long from the mines to the railroad station. While working in this mining camp, it was necessary to keep his faith rekindled, and at times to defend his Mormon religion and the standards it required. This defense at times was physical in nature, requiring fists and muscle, as well as intellectual strength. After acquiring the necessary funds for a stake in life, Charles and Priscilla were married. They purchased a place in Croydon Canyon above Morgan, and with milk cows, chickens, and small farm, made their start. When word of Hazel's death reached Charles in England, he recorded in his journal, "I was heartsick and wanted to leave for home, but I received a letter from my dear wife saying, 'Complete your mission, I will take care of everything here.' This gave me new courage." At Afton, he had many requests from farmers to trade groceries for butter churned on their farm, with old dasher-type churns. The butter's quality was varied, and there was no demand for it elsewhere in the valley. Charles decided to produce a uniform product and to market it where there was a demand. A convert who had recently emigrated from Denmark and with experience in Danish creameries was brought in to help. At a cold spring east of Afton, they worked all the butter over, getting out the extra buttermilk, adding the proper salt content, and produced a uniform product. Charles traveled to Rock Springs, Diamondville, and all the small towns along the Union Pacific Railroad and established a market for the butter. He is credited with having established the first creamery in Star Valley, as crude as it was. In 1905, he purchased a 160-acre farm in Ammon, Idaho, at a cost of $35 per acre. He moved his family there and continued to work in Evanston until he served a full 9 years. Upon arriving in Ammon, he spent a few months on the farm, but again accepted the manager's job in a small store owned by several townspeople. His pay dropped from $250 per month in Evanston to $85 per month as store manager. He remained there until 1910. Priscilla by this time was the mother of 3 sons and 8 daughters. In 1910, their doctor informed the family that Priscilla's health was such that she would not live more than a year in Idaho. His advice was to take her to a better climate and where the water was softer. With this move, he said, she might last 5 more years. Charles traveled to Utah that same week and purchased a farm in Taylor in Weaver County. Mother Priscilla was taken to Farmington to Aunt Bertha Spackman's. Her health began to improve at once through the good care and better climate. When the move from Idaho was completed, June 5, 1910, she was brought back to her family where she continued to improve. In Taylor, Priscilla began a turkey business and all summer long would walk over the farm checking on the turkeys, their eggs, and the hatching of the new poults. She outlasted the doctor's dire prediction by 24 years more than the time he had divined. Priscilla's contribution to the family were great ones, providing the stability necessary to balance what was certainly the nomadic, restless development and pioneer nature of her husband. To do this would have been enough, but added to this was the birth of 11 children, their care, training, education, and in some cases their death. In her early life, as always, she was active in the church, working in MIA and as a teacher of the religion class. While in Ammon, Idaho, she was president of the Relief Society, and after moving to Taylor, was active in the Relief Society there. Priscilla had a deep love and appreciation for her family. Aunt Bertha Spackman, who nursed her back to health in her home in Farmington, was always credited by Priscilla for her recovery. Charles again abandoned the farm to be secretary-treasurer for the Federal Land Bank, organizing the first branch in Weaver County and later in Morgan. He retired from this position on his 80th birthday. Priscilla passed away at the age of 77, Charles living on for 5 more years, alone with his children and grandchildren, until passing away on July 19, 1944. At the time of his death, he and Priscilla had 51 grandchildren and 39 great-grandchildren.
The legacy left by Charles and Priscilla Kingston seems to be one of love and consideration for all people, combined with a great sense of industry and commitment to life. Their children and grandchildren include wide-ranging talents, including doctors, writers, artists, engineers, pilots, farmers, electricians, skilled craftsmen, architects, businessmen, and many others. All these descendants seem to share Priscilla's deep concern and respect for their fellow men, as well as a tolerance for their different views, combined with Charles's restless industry for doing, creating, and organizing.
His son Charles William Kingston adds the following under date of November 3, 1962. The boy Charles sold papers and worked at other common jobs until he grew up to a young man, when he became a telegraph operator and electrician, and even made a workable telephone, a sample of which he brought to America and which I played with when I was a small boy. One of the many miraculous experiences he had while he was on his mission traveling without purchased trips was while he was walking from one town to another. A man, a perfect stranger, came out of a house and handed him a few pieces of small change. Further down the road there was a body of water that had made a small lake from rain that had fallen during the night, and a man was there in a boat carrying people across. Father counted the change the man had given him and found just enough for the pennies to take him to the other side. When he came home from his mission, I asked him to take me with him back to England, and he said, "I will take you to Rock Springs instead." I thought Rock Springs, Wyoming was as far away as England. Father and Mother rented a hotel, and Mother ran the hotel while Father ran a dray wagon and sold and delivered hay and grain. Lifting sacks of grain and bales of hay all day made his muscles as hard as nails. Besides this, he had become a good hand with the boxing gloves before he left England. We lived in Rock Springs 2 years, then moved to Grover, Wyoming, where Father started a store. He moved this store to Auburn across Salt River to the west. In this town my brother Richard was born the next spring. Grandmother Morris came and lived with us during this time. We moved to Star Valley in the year 1890. Father sold his store in Auburn to Henry Harry Harrison and moved back to Grover, where Father filed on 480 acres of land, where he built a home for his family. He taught school the first winter in Grover. Another time, a certain rich man offered him $10,000 in gold if he would decide a contest case this man had filed against a poor settler to take away the land he had homesteaded. Father told this man the case could be decided on its merits. If the settler had not lived up to the law, the rich man would get the decision. He decided the case in favor of the poor settler. There was a valuable vein of coal that the rich man was mining that extended under the poor man's homestead that was worth many times more than the $10,000. At this time, Father had lost a lot of money in the sheep business, and $10,000 would have paid all his debts and left him a good share in the bank. About 1904, Father bought a farm at Ammon, Idaho, 160 acres of land with full water rights for $5,000. A few years later, he sold this farm for $90 an acre. With this money he got from the sale of this farm, he bought a farm in Ogden. In Ogden, he went into the abstract business. If a poor person came to him for an abstract and asked him about pay, he would charge from $3 to $5, much less than the amount charged for the same work. He also was an agent for the Federal Land Bank and secured farm loans for farmers in the Ogden area. Mother was 5 years younger than Father, but she died 5 years earlier at the age of 77. Father came to the mine and lived with us about 3 weeks. This was when Minerva was a baby. He called her his little sweetheart. When Mother was sick just before she died, her daughter Bessie, who had died in 1931, came to see her. Mother asked Bessie if her time had come. Bessie said, "I will go back and find out, and if it's your time, I'll come back and get you."
The following is a testimonial by Charles Kingston, which is published in Andy Jensen's LDS Biographical Encyclopedia, Volume 1, page 331.
At the instance of the leader of our stake, I am writing a testimony which I delivered in the 10th Ward Weaver Stake, that the youth of Zion may peradventure receive benefit from the same. I came to Utah with much prejudice in my heart. I had been taught that Mormonism was the greatest fraud perpetrated upon the world. My father had joined the church when I was but a child, causing his own mother to become estranged. He refused to join hands with him in Mormonism. My father emigrated shortly after joining the church, and when I became 22 years of age, I left my home in England and crossed the waters to join him. I left a good position with one of the leading railroads in my native land. Therefore, when I reached this pioneer community in America in 1879 and found a hard, severe winter, so severe that livestock were dying for want of food, I began thinking that things were rather tough. So unaccustomed was I to this sort of life that I felt that I was buried above ground, as it were. However, I was very fond of reading. It seemed the only thing that kept me alive. When the good saints found I was reading Mormonism, they just swamped me with Mormon literature. I was glad of this for two reasons. It gave me sufficient reading material, and then it seems that I had a desire to find out the untruth of Mormonism, so I could show my people the error with which they were connected. Never for one moment did I think that this could not be done. The Book of Mormon was my main weapon of assault. I read it with much care, making comparisons with the New Testament, of which I had an elementary acquaintance. As I proceeded in my investigation, I discovered I was gradually drinking in the truths of that great book. Having finished the reading, I laid the book on the table and said, "Well, I have finished the reading of it." There happened to be present at the time an aged prospector from Clarksville, a very wicked, profane man. He said, "Well, what do you think of it?" I then raised my right hand high above my head and said, "If there is any truth in this world, it's in that book." Soon I found myself defending the work before apostates and others who opposed it.
The following is given by a granddaughter, Marilynn Grant Stevenson. One strong memory I have of Grandpa Kingston was hearing my father Richard tell of the time he was called to administer to him. Grandpa was very ill and not expected to live, and Richard blessed him that he would get well. The next morning Richard was called again to his father's side. Seeing that he felt much stronger, Richard expected his father to thank him for the blessing. Instead, he was told, "Don't you ever again bless me to get well. My wife is waiting for me on the other side, and I have done temple work for over 5,000 people. I know that my work for them is not done till I look all of them up and see if they have accepted the gospel."
The Ogden Standard Examiner of Sunday, May 21st, 1933, page 2B, gives the following. Mr. and Mrs. Charles Kingston of Ogden celebrated their golden wedding anniversary May 17th, when a program was given in the Taylor Ward Recreation Hall. All of the living children and many of the grandchildren were in attendance.
Charles Kingston and Mary Priscilla Lurwell Tucker were the proud parents of 11 children, 3 sons and 8 daughters.
Charles William Kingston was born June 26, 1884, at Croydon, Morgan County, Utah, and was married May 17, 1906, in the Logan Temple, to Vesta Minerva Stoll. She bore him 6 children. He was married March 30, 1935, at Logan, to Amanda Lavenda Newman. She bore him 7 children. Vesta died September 19, 1963, age 79, at Salt Lake City, and was buried September 21st in the Bountiful City Cemetery. Charlie died November 29, 1975, age 91, at Salt Lake City, Salt Lake County, Utah, and was buried December 2nd in the Bountiful City Cemetery.
Hazel was born May 20th, 1886, at Croydon, Morgan County, Utah. She died September 30th, 1887, aged 15 months, and was buried in the Morgan City Cemetery, Morgan County. Florence Ruth was born January 15, 1888, at Morgan County, Utah, and was married June 11, 1908, in the Salt Lake Temple to Jesse Hans Nielsen. She bore him 9 children. She was married August 15, 1958, at Salt Lake City to Almond Dale Daniels Brown. There were no children from this marriage. Dale died January 11, 1960, age 75, at Mesa, Maricopa County, Arizona, and was buried January 16th in the Ogden City Cemetery. Jess died August 25th, 1949, age 64, at Berkeley, Alameda County, California, and was buried August 29th in the Brigham City Cemetery. Florence died January 24th, 1981, age 93, at Pleasanton, Alameda County, California, and was buried January 31st in the Brigham City Cemetery, Box Elder County, Utah. Betsy Belake Kingston was born January 15, 1888, at Morgan County, Utah, and was married September 15, 1910, in the Salt Lake Temple, to Charles Henry Owen. She bore him 7 children. He died June 28, 1984, age 97, at Taylorsville, and was buried July 2nd in the Ogden City Cemetery. Bessie died May 24, 1931, age 43, at Salt Lake City, and was buried May 26th in the Salt Lake City Cemetery.
Richard James Kingston was born April 21, 1891, at Auburn, Uintah, now Lincoln County, Wyoming, and was married October 23, 1919, in the Salt Lake Temple, to Minnie Eliza Jensen. She bore him 3 children. He was married September 9, 1957, at Logan, to Donna Estella Child. There were no children from this marriage. Minnie died December 21, 1955, age 63, at Ogden, and was buried December 23 in the Ogden City Cemetery. Richard died October 8, 1971, age 80, at Ogden, Weaver County, Utah, and was buried October 12 in the Ogden City Cemetery.
Estella Lucille Kingston was born June 5, 1893, at Grover, Uintah County, Wyoming, and was married November 12, 1913, in the Salt Lake Temple, to Horace Hawley. She bore him 7 children. Horace died January 5, 1973, age 82, at Salt Lake City, and was buried January 9th in the Ogden City Cemetery. Stella died September 29, 1971, age 78, at Ogden, and was buried October 2nd in the Ogden City Cemetery. Lillian Kingston was born February 26, 1895, at Afton, Uintah County, Wyoming, and was married December 19, 1917, in the Salt Lake Temple to Ephraim Coulter. They had 1 child. Ephraim died February 7, 1971, age 77, at Salt Lake City, and was buried February 11 in the Salt Lake City Cemetery. He was married February 14, 1939, at Santa Cruz County, California, to John Gordon Fisher. There were no children from this marriage. Lillian died December 6, 1976, age 81, at Ogden, and was buried December 9th in the Ogden City Cemetery.
Clarence David Kingston was born March 26, 1897, at Grover, Uintah County, Wyoming, and was married March 20, 1918, in the Salt Lake Temple to Viva Witt. He bore him 6 children.
Mary Elizabeth Kingston was born December 27, 1898, at Evanston, Uintah County, Wyoming, and was married November 22, 1917, in the Salt Lake Temple to Bruce Milford Olson. She bore him 6 children. Bruce died April 25, 1947, age 50, at Phoenix, Maricopa County, Arizona, and was buried May 4th at Idaho Falls, Bonneville County, Idaho. He married October 1st, 1951, at Ely, White Pine County, Nevada, to James Paul Reed. There were no children from this marriage. He was married August 15, 1958, in the Salt Lake Temple to Ira Oliver Fisher. There were no children from this marriage. Ira died December 5, 1976, age 94, at Idaho Falls, Bonneville County, Idaho, and was buried there in the Rose Hill Cemetery. Luella Agnes Kingston was born March 24, 1901, at Morgan County, Utah, and was married January 8, 1919, in the Salt Lake Temple, to Abram Matson McFarland, who bore him 6 children. Abram died February 26, 1983, aged 86, and was buried March 2nd in the Ogden City Cemetery. Luella died July 28, 1967, aged 66, at Ogden, Weber County, Utah, and was buried July 31st in the Ogden City Cemetery. Priscilla May Kingston was born July 14, 1903, at Evanston, Uinta County, Wyoming, and was married August 18, 1922, in the Salt Lake Temple, to Vernon Oburn Law, who bore him 2 children. He died May 1, 1925, aged 32, at Ogden, and was buried May 4 in the Ogden City Cemetery. Priscilla died December 2, 1925, aged 22, at Taylor, Weber County, Utah, and was buried December 7th in the Ogden City Cemetery.
Total known posterity of Charles Kingston and Mary Priscilla Tucker as of 20 June 1987. 11 children, 61 grandchildren, 196 great-grandchildren, 188 second great-grandchildren, for a total posterity of 456. There were 114 total spouses of children, grandchildren, etc., making a total posterity, including spouses, of 570.
A search of a number of different records by Joseph Grant Stevenson yielded the following.
Charles was baptized and confirmed November 9, 1880, by Bishop Albert D. Dixon. He was ordained an elder January 7, 1883, by James H. Mason. On October 19, 1884, he was ordained a 70 by Seymour B. Young and became a member of the 35th Quorum of 70. He received his U.S. citizenship on May 12, 1886, issued by the First Judicial Court of Salt Lake City. Charles was ordained an high priest August 13, 1892, by George Osmond, and set apart the same day as a high counselor of the newly formed Star Valley State. He was sustained as second counselor in the Woodruff State Presidency June 6, 1898. Charles was sustained and set apart as president of the High Priest Quorum on November 3, 1906. He served on the North Weber State High Council beginning March 24, 1912, and was sustained president of the High Priest Quorum on March 22, 1914. On July 15, 1917, he was set apart as state genealogical representative, where he served for 12 years.
The obituary for Charles Kingston appeared in the Deseret News on Thursday, July 20th, 1944, page 7, as follows. Death claims West leader. Charles Kingston was active churchman. Ogden, Charles Kingston, 87, well-known member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, retired secretary-treasurer of the Weber and Huntsville Eden National Farm Loan Association and former U.S. Registrar of Evanston, Wyoming, Federal Land Office, died Wednesday at the home of a daughter, Mrs. Horace Holly, 368 8th Street in Austin. He was the first postmaster in Auburn, Wyoming. It is recorded that in early history that he succeeded in ripening the first crop of grain raised in Star Valley, Wyoming. He is also credited to starting the creamery business in Star Valley. The funeral notice for Charles Kingston appeared in the Deseret News of Saturday, July 22, 1944, page 10, as follows. Charles Kingston, Ogden. Services for Charles Kingston, 87, prominent churchman, retired secretary-treasurer of Weber and Huntsville Eden National Farm Loan Association, and former registrar of Evanston, Wyoming, who died Wednesday, were to be conducted Saturday at 2 p.m. in the Ogden 22nd Ward Chapel by M.B. Fox, former bishop of the ward. Burial will be in the Ogden City Cemetery. As descendants of these fine and faithful people, let us remember their strong, wonderful qualities and try to live our lives to make them proud of us.